Hej, mitt namn är Ulf Sill. Jag bor här i Morrum.
Hi, my name's Ulf Sill and I live right here in Morrum. I've been fishing for some time now. This is my 11th season. I've tied quite a few flies and some of them have been very successful in catching fish. I'm going to show you two flies. One of them a classic Morrum fly, the woolsock. There have been many variations on the woolsock over the years, and I'm going to show you one of my own in black, which has been very successful in catching silver salmon. The other pattern I'm going to show you is the bice, a very good fly in olive green and an unusual colour.
Då kör vi igång.
To hold the tube, I use an ordinary darning needle. Put the tube in the vise and attach the binding thread. I prefer to bind without a spool, it just feels better. Firstly, I tie the butt. Save a bit of the red yarn for tying off the butt later. Turn the end of the yarn forwards to stop the butt sliding down the tube or moving out of position. Tie in a stiffer hackle. This will act as a support for the spay hackle later. The hackle I'm tying in now will give the fly flexibility and also support the spay hackle. Tie in the spay hackle. You can see that it's longer fibres than the standard red hackle I used earlier. The spay hackle has long, soft fibres, and if you don't stiffen it, it'll lie along the tube when you're fishing. The long, soft fibres of the spay hackle help it move well in the water. I smooth back the hackle and fasten it with a few turns of the binding thread. Next I choose a blue dubbing, a mix of different colours where blue angel hair is dominant. You can even use peacock or other mixed dubbings, but this blue colour has proved itself in spring, summer and autumn fishing. Now that the first part of the body is finished, I add a saddle hackle, but you could also use a cockneck hackle. It all depends on how much springiness you want in the fibres. Personally, I prefer flies with a softer hackle so the fly moves well in the water. Having added the hackle, I now tie in a 5mm brass weight to balance the fly, otherwise it hangs in the water a bit too much. Next add some flash, but you don't have to. It all depends on how clear the water is, the temperature and so on. Sometimes the fly will fish better with less flash, but if the fly has too much, you can always remove some on the day. The last black hackle is somewhat longer than the first one and is used to improve the fly's proportions. The fly's finished. All you need to do is varnish it.
Nu kör vi igång med den andra flugan.
Let's move on to the other fly, the bice, which is part of a series of 5 flies. If you want to know more about the development of these flies and how to tie them, I've produced a DVD with more detailed information about these flies.
Lite mer information om just de här flugarna.
I tie this fly in a brass tube. Fix the yarn to the tube and tie in the butt in the same way as for the wool sock. Save some yarn to tie off the butt. This lock isn't as important when using wool as when you use Antron yarn, which has a more slippery surface. For the body, I use Antron yarn, which has 2 major advantages over wool. It's durable and it has an attractive lustre in the water. I fasten the body with a few turns of binding thread before adding a ginger or a rusty orange front hackle. I wind round all of the hackle, starting with the longer fibres, to get a good taper and to make sure the longer fibres cover the ones behind. Pull back the fibres and wind the binding thread over the last turns of the hackle to fasten it well. Now to make the wings. I usually have a short lower wing and another which is about a third longer. The third and final wing is the longest. Then I add some flash before going back to tie another wing, made from softer material, but just as short as the second wing. Finally, I add soft body hairs. There's an advantage in using two relatively short lower wings, as the flexibility of this wing will decide the length and movement of the fly in the water. I fasten each wing with a few turns of thread, followed by a few strands of flash. I fasten the flashaboo in the middle and smooth back the other half. This gives added security. You don't risk losing any fibres. I prefer firefly because of the delicate surface, and mix it with angel hair, which is a little thinner. The fly shouldn't be too sparkling, and you can always trim off the flash if you need to. After the flash, I tie in the first of the upper wings, using a softer fox hair than for the other wings. This helps the fly to move well in the water. The upper and lower wings have different qualities. The upper wing should be made of soft hair to help the fly move well, while the springiness of the lower wing should help to lift the long wing. Cut flash fibres to a suitable length. When the wing's finished, I add another hackle, the front hackle, which will form one end of the fly, before adding the jungle cock feathers. If you bind in a front hackle, choose feathers with thin quills, otherwise it's almost impossible to find the space for a whole hackle in front of the wings. A thin quill helps the hackle to lie better. It's also important that every turn lies in front of the previous turn. If they overlap, you get gaps in the binding. This makes no difference to how it will fish, but it spoils the appearance of the fly. The fly is finished, but you can add sides of jungle cock feathers. I've saved some of the hackle quills to lock the jungle cock feathers when it's been bound. These feathers should be the same length on each side and lie at the same angle, otherwise there's a risk of the fly rotating in the water. It's worth spending some extra time on this so that the feathers are identical. Turn back the hackle quills and bind them, so that the jungle cock feathers don't come loose later. All you need to do now is to varnish the head. I usually have 3 coats. A thin clear varnish to penetrate all the bindings, a second coat, thick and black to give a shiny surface, and the last coat's a medium thick varnish to help build up and even out any imperfections in the binding. I've noticed that I've been using the original bice pattern quite a lot, throughout most of the season in fact. I use the biggest version when the water's high and very cold, even when the river's flooding. Then I change size to fit the water temperature and other conditions. These are good flies, you can use all season. I've caught a lot of fish in spring and summer, as well as sea trout during autumn days. But the original bice fly is not alone in fishing well. Lots of other flies give good catches throughout the season. However, you need to vary the size and colour. A darker version of this series of bice flies, one for the spring season and the May salmon, a third variety. And then don't forget the big orange flies, so useful in all humus-coloured rivers. You should always have a sunray in your fly box. Something special I've been experimenting with lately is a pure flash fly. The entire wing's made of flashaboo. If you look closely, you can see a rather stiff lower wing which lifts the flash, but the rest of the main wing's just flash. There's a smaller upper wing to make it look like a fly. If we look in this box, we can see the same selection of flies to be used for fishing at the end of May, throughout the summer and for autumn days. It's autumn, so we're fishing for trout. In the black box, we see that the choice of colour is quite simple for once: black. Big black flies, but based on different principles. There are some zonkers, in this case a temple dog zonker. Some look like muddlers with dry fly hackles. Traditional muddlers with deer hair. And a version of the well-known sparkling fly with wings made of flash. And yet another black fly, a bit special as the body is extended with plastic tubing so the hook's further behind the wing. This helps stop the hair getting tangled round the hook, and it makes it difficult for the trout to avoid getting caught. If you've got a selection of these flies in your box, you'll be successful in this river. Hope to see you here soon.
Så ni er hjertelig velkomne hit.